The California community college system is the largest system in the nation. 114 colleges, community colleges in California alone. The components of the Engage program are as thus, but mostly the money is going towards scholarships. The students get up to $15,000 now in scholarship annually as part of this scholarship program. And they have scholarships and mentoring for 2 years at community college, plus 2 years if they can apply and get admitted to Cal Poly. Now, the admission rate is pretty high. I think it was about 87% of applicants that were in the Engage program were accepted to Cal Poly. And like I said once before, this whole time, for the entire 4 years of our program, Engage scholars will have 2 mentors, one from their community college and then one from Cal Poly as well. And so, as part of that mentoring, one of the activities that we do with the students is to talk about a lot of the deficit language that is typically used to describe transfer students. And so I'd like to try running this exercise here. So if you have your phones, let's pull up, get that QR code going. And I'd like to, now I recognize most of you are transfer professionals and would never use deficit language to describe a transfer student. But you must have heard deficit language being used to describe transfer students in your travels. And so if you could, use the QR code and share. I see a couple people with phones up still. I don't know how my students capture the QR code. So they are so fast, right? And I neglected myself to pull this up. Had to change browsers because of the caption. And so this is what if you haven't used Mentimeter, it's a really nice tool. This is the word cloud tool. And if you're not familiar with the word cloud, the larger the word, the more times that's been entered, right? We have a very small group here. So most of these words are the exact same size. But we can see that we have very similar words here to describe transfer students. Underprepared is common, right? One that I heard in my own department meeting was that they were not good enough to be a first-year student, and so they must not be as good, right? That's heartbreaking, right? That's somebody's child we're talking about. Not regular systems, not academic, undecided, vocational, lazy. That's a harsh one. Wow.
So can I get clarification on the vocational? They're using that as a derogatory term?
Apparently.
That's unfortunate.
Sure, faculty don't. I put that one, and I hear it in our faculty senate a lot. Why would we cater to transfer students if they're just on track to be electricians or plumbers?
Yeah, we get those for students who originally are doing an Associate of Science as opposed to an AA, and they come as a deficit because they're missing like half of what courses that traditional first-year students would have to have by that point.
And so it's this type of environment where students or transfer students are coming into. Okay. Oh, I have to switch back. Okay. And so this is a well-known thing, right? We know transfer students, underrepresented students in general, are portrayed as high risk or high maintenance, underprepared. And so absent from this deficit mindset is an asset-based view. And so we, in our project, we decided to adopt an asset-based view that's based on cultural wealth. And so I can't, we won't have a discussion about this, but you can imagine what are the potential impacts of this type of deficit view on the success of our students. So we, one of the things we do with our mentors is to help prepare students for this, but also to replace this deficit with asset language. And so this takes us to our first asset model, culturally informed strengths.
All right. So picking up with that last question around one of the impacts of deficit phrases, there's impacts on the individual themselves, right? What they think of themselves, their self-determination. There's impact on how they're treated by the individuals at the institution as well. So in an effort to change the mindset, we're sort of all been trained in a deficit mindset for our whole life. Everything that's good about us sometimes has been used against us. So I have my top strength on the CliftonStrengths is communication, and I was just told that I talk too much. We had one student in the program who has empathy as his top strength and has never seen that as a strength of his. And couldn't see how empathy was related to engineering. But when we had a workshop with him, when we've gone through this strengths assessment, we had a workshop and we brought him up and we talked about how the fact that him having empathy for the end user of whatever computer program that is using, that's something that's maybe missing from some other people's set of strengths, but he can contribute that to a team. So I'll come back to that example, but Gallup has a formula about strengths. So there's a assessment you can take online to find out your top strengths. The handout that we have that we pointed you to at the beginning of the session, it just has a brief list of the 34 themes of talent. But you can take that test, you find out where your talents are, and the idea is that you can invest in those talents to make them strengths. Time spent practicing, developing skills, building your knowledge, and then you get what we call a strength. Now, as I'm going through, I'd love for you to choose one of those strengths to have in mind for yourself, because it might be helpful to connect to this model. We're not going to have enough time to probably go through all the exercises as we thought, but we want you to sort of follow along if that's okay.
So if you walked in late, I did ask people to open up your conference app. There are 3 PDFs in there. One of the PDFs is a list of strengths. If you don't have that ability, I encourage you to partner up with somebody who does have that ability. And so this is your opportunity now to move around the room and find somebody, make a new friend. And so please do that, and I'd like for you to identify one strength on that list that you feel like really kind of describes you. For me, it's achiever. I'm an achiever. I have this, I can work really hard. I have really high expectations for myself, but I also overburden myself. I overextend myself. And that my wife's very angry at me anytime because of that. And so that's that's an example of a strength that was on that list that really does kind of describe me and my personality. So please go ahead and do that now. We'll take a few minutes for you to look at the list and identify a strength that describes yourself.
Okay, everyone. So let me hear just from one person what's an example of one of the strengths that they may have identified with on the list.
We were both wooers.
Wooers.
Yes.
Wow. Now, keep that strength in mind. So woo, by the way, stands for winning others over. It's the type of person who probably thrives at a conference like this. Anybody else have that experience where they're the type of person who wants to go up to everybody, probably make connections with as many people as possible, and oftentimes, use those to help their students. I said, in the context, I think, of our work, Woo is really important to gather resources, which people can be resources. Now, to go to a conference, you might think, okay, only the people at Woo that have Woo are going to be the best people to go to conferences. There's other strengths, other ways that you might engage at a conference and still be successful at a conference. You might use input, which is like collecting lots of information, or you might be a relator, you might be a person who's going to have one-on-one meetings with, like maybe like hour-long meetings, not like sort of cocktail hours sort of things. So there's different ways of engaging in a conference. There's different ways of being a transfer student. There's different ways of teaching transfer students. So we're trying to get our faculty and to mentor transfer students. All of our faculty are not going to be the same kind of mentor. They have to leverage their own strengths and use their own strengths to do that, as well as promote this idea of strengths within their students.
Danny, so our scholarship programs for engineering, is Woo a common strength for engineering students?
Woo is not. It doesn't. Neither does empathy, as I mentioned before. We have lots of people who have restorative, who that's the one that wants to solve problems, or analytical, kind of take things apart. While those are all valuable, of course, but we're trying to create a culture where all 34 of these are valuable, and not only that, all identities are welcome, and all identities are affirmed as well. And that brings me to the next part of this. So we don't only employ a strengths-based approach. We call it a few different versions: culturally informed strengths, or strengths from a social justice perspective. But this workshop participant years ago, it was outside of higher ed, but said this quote: "Our external experiences and the way we walk in the world can impact our development and our use of our internalized strengths." So, in part, our external experiences are due to our social and cultural identities and the different social contexts we've been raised and taught and worked in, and how people react to us and how we react to our strengths. So, the opportunities, remember that talent times investment equals strength. While that may be true, it doesn't quite capture the complexity of students' lives. So the opportunities we've had for investment in our strengths has been shaped by our social identities and our social context, the nature of the opportunities, our own understanding and experience of our strengths, and how other people react to our strengths. So the student that I mentioned before, who has empathy number one, also he's a male student, and he is a Latino. And he comes from a culture where empathy is not encouraged for men to experience or to develop. So he hasn't developed it in the same way. He's developed in other ways, for sure, because he points to all these things that he's done in his family, who he's helped in his life, and the teams that he's been on, his empathy is useful. So we were trying to get him to see how that translates to being a student at Cal Poly, but also being a transfer student, but being a Houston Pure Science major, which isn't quite captured in the curriculum, if you might say, or in the mindset of the faculty that he has as mentors or as his instructors. So the idea is that, okay, now he does have a mentor who can validate that strength and not simply like put that strength away. Let's focus on some other strengths that we have. So I've been alluding to this like all along, that there's multiple sides of all these strengths. So like people can view empathy as a weakness. Communication is my top strength, which in a short presentation, I have to realize does have a shadow side, because I can't say everything that I want to say. I have to find the most important things. So the shadow side of the strength, when you use your strength too much at the wrong time, the wrong situation, or with the wrong person. I'll ask some of my wooers here. What for you might be, are there any times in your life where you think the wooing might have been too much, or at the wrong time with the wrong people?
Yeah.
Yes. We want everyone to love us, but once we have your love, then we'll cast you aside because there's billions of other people to gain. So you can see at the context of a conference that is where it's most valued, probably, or one of the places it's most valued. But in some other contexts,
But it has a use in all those other contexts as well, even if it seems like it doesn't. You might be able to, woo somebody, or, convince somebody. It's an influencing strength. How can you influence people? But sometimes you can influence them to do really good things for themselves, in terms of a one-on-one relationship with a student, get them to buy into the resources that you're offering, or even help use that woo to grab more students to the table. So we have to work on our own mindsets as well, right? That the way that we're operating in our job, even though we have these shadow sides and people might point those out, they all lead to strengths as well. So we can help minimize the shadow side with feedback from other people and by drawing on the other strengths that we have. Okay, so we just did an example right here with the woo. I want you to turn to a partner now and describe what, one of the strengths that you can strengthen if you were using that too much, or in any situation, or at the wrong time, or with the wrong person. Sometimes I say my communication with my mom, that's where it's the shadow side comes up the most. So sometimes the shadow side can be with a particular person in your life. But so you can sort of connect to this model. I'd love for you to practice with someone next to you. Mary. So, back up to the previous slide, there's another point that I want to make. By the way, I'm trying to condense hours long, 4-hour long workshops into 20 minutes. It's difficult. But, so, this idea of the shadow side I mentioned, also the barrier label, when others perceive your strengths as weaknesses, that it can often be gendered or racialized. So, by that I mean that sometimes there are stereotypes that exist around, not sometimes, there are always stereotypes that exist around our various social and cultural identities. So taking gender and race as the two that we're talking about now, where that may compound the perception of your shadow side. So, for instance, take this male with empathy. It's a gendered strength, empathy. It's one where, it's expected of female. So if a female does not have empathy, she's seen as less than. But if a man does have empathy, he's seen as less than. It's seen as a deficit. And so on top of having the shadow side of empathy that everybody might have, when your gender sort of coincides with that stereotype, you'll experience it in an even more oppressive way. And then add on race, for that matter. In certain racial groups or ethnic groups, empathy is even less valued. So what does that person think about themselves, or that empathy? He didn't think of it as a strength whatsoever. He was surprised that it came up on his assessment, but the way that it empowered him to think about, okay, I don't have to hide this part of me away. I can, if I have people that are supporting me to develop this and to value this, now it takes a lot. It can't just be one mentor. We need to change a lot more than that. He's going to go into other situations, but hopefully we've built up some, confidence in that area, and that we can hopefully change some of the other environments that he's in as well. One of the other concepts we introduce is this idea of the dimmer switch. So you don't have an on and off switch for the strengths. I always have more I'm going to want to say, but I have to recognize there are certain times where I can dim that down. And as it relates to this idea of more of a culturally informed model, I have been saying this for years, just okay, just dim down your strengths. Just dim it down. And what I realized is that I had somebody in a presentation, a black woman, who said, why is it that we always have to be the ones that dim down our strengths? So in employing this culturally informed model, I have to realize, even for myself, as we're facilitating, as we're mentoring students, it's not telling them that to turn down their strengths to fit the situation. What other strengths do they have that we can tell them to leverage? So a more strengths-based conversation, we can still, they may choose to dim it down. This is kind of like a both and sort of thing. But how can we empower them to use some of their other strengths? So for instance, if you have empathy, but you also have strategic as a strength, that can have you be a little bit more strategic about how to use that, if you will. Or, if you have command as a strength, command is one that's very gender as well, and then very, so I would say a white man, a white woman, black man, and a black woman all have command. What do you think the difference in their experience in the world, in the workplace, as students? The white man with command is seen as the natural born leader. The white woman with command might get involved in EITCH in her lifetime. The black man with command might be seen as a threat, at threatening in certain situations. And the black woman with command may be seen as an angry black woman. But they all have command. So we don't want to tell them to dim down their command. But what other strengths can they leverage to have them have that command be more effective for them? So it's a longer conversation than we have time for now. I'm trying to paint a couple of examples to get you to see how this might be different than just using the CliftonStrengths, which we think is a great tool, but any tool that we use is imperfect, particularly when we're trying to reach multiple types of identities that are out there. And in particular, our transfer students, particularly transfer students that are from marginalized backgrounds, are entering environments that are not valuing not only their identities, but also sometimes their strengths that they bring, that some of that's what they've learned as transfer students that they're bringing to our institution, to our institution. And that brings us to our second model.
Okay, so I guess I wanted to stress, our mentoring isn't to change the students, right? We want to inform the students, and what we do try to strive for is the change of the systems that these students live in. We have to consider the intersectionality of all of the students' identities, right? Their gender, their race, their religion, whatever their identities are. And so, because there's not just one model that will fit all of those different intersectional identities, we present more than one model for our mentoring program. And so we're moving to asset model 2, community cultural wealth. This was a model that was developed by Yosso at Riverside. And usually when we think of assets, we think of money, right? Money and wealth. And what she would argue, and what we've adopted, is that the wealth of a student is more than just the economic wealth, but it's all of these other types of wealth. And I'll describe each of these, but there's aspirational capital, familial, social, navigational, resistant, and linguistic capital. So I'll move to the next slide, where these are described. Aspirational capital is is when you have this kind of vision, and that kind of carries you through. And it's a real motivating factor. The linguistic capital means that you can communicate more than in one way. Right? And I'm not just meaning verbal, like different forms of English, but cuentos, or visual arts, or music, or poetry, or other examples. Navigational capital, you can navigate systems and institutions more fluidly, and sometimes this is because you've grown up in places where the system really isn't there to support you, right, and your identities. Social capital, so the people and your supporters that you surround yourselves with. Right? The familial capital is more than just your kin, right? But it's also that sense of community and history that comes with you that is very important. And then finally, we have resistant capital. You have the knowledge and skills to challenge the inequality in the systems when you encounter them. So we stress these different strengths for all our transfer students. And so the exercise, I'm going to go back to the previous slide. This is essentially different words for the same model. But what I would like you to do is to turn to your partner and pick an element of the community cultural wealth that you feel like would apply to a transfer student in your program, and discuss with your partner. Okay, so here we go. We'll take 4 minutes and do this. So again, pick a capital that you think a transfer student in your program would benefit from. we have any volunteers to share?
I'm always willing to share. The
You're all the wooers and willing to share.
aspirational free time. I work with transfer students who are typically coming from community college, and most of them are first generation students, and they are so driven to be the first thing in line to get a bachelor's degree. And they're usually working multiple part-time jobs or balancing taking care of their parents, but their aspirational goals just it gives them so much strength to push through. And with working with low-income families, because they have less resources, they're very resourceful, and I think they build stronger community because they have to be that those with more resources don't need to leave as much. They don't have that sense of community.
Do we have someone else who would like to share as well? Yes, please.
Not a wooer, but I can try. I was mentioning about how linguistic capital is something that a lot of our students, I come from Miami, Florida, our school is FIU. We have a lot of students whose default is minimum 2 languages, sometimes 3. And because they see it as such a common occurrence, they don't see it as a benefit, especially when it comes to pursuing internships or job opportunities outside of the English-speaking United States. They think that they have to stay here, and if there is no work here, and you can do remote work and you have a second language, it's something that's clicking with them now, a lot of them, and it's being pushed, especially now in the global job market that we have, but it's there, it's there, we just have to talk to them about it and see how they can really pull through that.
A lot of these things, most of them, if not all of them, we take for granted. The students take for granted, we might take for granted ourselves, the strengths that we have, the capital that we have. So part of it is having an opportunity for us to, shift our own mindset of our own, because it's hard for us to preach what we don't practice, practice what we preach. So we have to create communities of people that are operating this mindset, right? So that we can then have authentic conversations with our students. They can see us as role models and doing it, and not, oh yeah, I'm good at that, but I'm bad at this, so let's focus on this. So even that linguistic capital that's been for decades, centuries, been something that's seen often as a deficit that you don't. I don't know why people see this deficit that you speak 2 languages, or grew up with a different language. But of course, the systems that we have in place and the culture in our institutions dismiss that. But that not only is for our global economy and all that, it increases mental capacities for other subjects and for creates new neural pathways that can be helpful. So it's how can we change the mindset to see that these things are strengths, these things are capital, not something that they need to hide away. So that's sort of really the message that, of course, I know you all will nod along to, but it's how do we convince also the people on our campuses that might be saying that we're spending too much time on these topics, so that's why we're bringing in mentors from across our campus to sort of spread the love.
Okay, so we're wrapping up here. So we use both of these strengths models in our engagement training program. Different models appeal to different students and maybe are useful in different situations. We really believe that investing in student identity is important for our transfer student success, but especially in the presence of inequitable systems like hiring. And so with that, we'd like to take questions if you have any. Please.
I'm curious about your choice of the word mentor, because in hiring an advisor, mentor, coach, what was the decision point there?
I think that I think it was a default, to the culture of our institution to call mentor. Some of us that are involved in this grant also are involved in another NSF grant where we're doing a similar model with faculty, and we had the debate. We first called we had the debate at the beginning. We called them coaches have had some conversations around. We also had used the book Critical Mentoring at the beginning of our project to see that if we are going to use this term mentoring, we have to have it done in a critical way, which is similar to this idea of understanding the influence of our social cultural identities and the systems of privilege and oppression based on identities. So yes, I think we need to be more mindful of the language and like what that implies, because mentoring sometimes can be how are we going to socialize you into how we do things here. This is how we do things, and this is how you're going to succeed. Versus the model that we are is really trying to empower the student to actually coach them to be more of themselves, not to hide themselves away to fit in. So yeah, but good question, and I think in the second round of Engage, we may have a different terminology for the roles in the grant.
I think also on the ground level, we use advisor as kind of the professional academic advisors. So that's just a term that was associated with that role, and this is something different. I do recognize that there's a patriarchal feeling to the word mentor, right? Or Kim. Other questions? Please.
With the community cultural wealth model, is that something you introduce to students directly? And if so, how do they respond to that idea of these different forms of cultural capital?
We do introduce it to them. The worksheet that we have is an example of how we engage them with it. And this is one, I use it beyond this program, is one that I think really resonates with everybody. Even if not all 6 resonate with one person, they usually can find themselves in like 2 or 3 of them. Particularly that aspirational capital, I think, is something, again, I think that they take for granted, and they're like, wow, okay, like now I can see, once they start reflecting, I think a lot of times people aren't as reflective as we don't have the luxury of having time to do that. So we keep moving on until we pause them in some workshop like this where we're like, okay, reflect on how you've gotten where you are through that. So I'd say that is one that resonates a lot with the students pretty quickly.
I think the other thing to think about is different mentors probably have different comforts with the different strength models, right? Asset models. And also, our 2 community colleges that are part of this program have 2 very different demographics. One is very close to Cal Poly and majority white male engineering students. And then the other is in Santa Maria, a lot more Hispanic families live in that area, but also still pretty dominantly male because it's engineering.
And are there any pre and post assessments of how successful in terms of changing your community? I was curious, how long has the program been active?
It's been active for 5 years, so you would think that we would have I think a lot of things got disrupted during the pandemic that maybe we would have done otherwise. And then assessing the change of mindsets is not as easy as I would like it to be. But I think through our interview data, which we have yet to analyze, I think we'll see, at least some anecdotal evidence of how people have, and we hear it in like the feedback where like sort of like our, especially at the end of the workshops when we ask for people to share what they got and all that sort of stuff. We haven't analyzed any of that data yet, but I think we definitely have a sense of like how it's not consistent in the same place. Like even for me, who does this for a living, talks about these strengths all the time, like that. My mindset's gonna be shifted forever. It's like how quickly can I get back? So like I think there are some of them that have shared how I got really down about X, Y, or Z, but then I remembered, okay, I have these certain strengths that I can apply to this. Like I have a way out, and I think those are the stories that we want to share
I do see we're at time, so I thank you for your participation and sharing. We'll hang out here if you have additional questions, but I hope you